Okay, we're running a little bit behind time, but the next speaker is Stu Soled from Exxon Research and Engineering. The title of his talk is Activity and Selectivity Control in Iron Catalyzed Fischer-Tropsch Synthesis.
Good morning. I'm going to try to relate to you some of the studies that we've been involved in trying to understand the relationship of selectivity in iron-based catalysts, particularly in trying to develop iron catalysts that would be highly selective towards olefin synthesis. We're interested in doing these olefin syntheses in conditions that are not really ideal for making olefins, that is high hydrogen partial pressures of hydrogen, which one would obtain, for example, if one were generating the syngas from methane. Most of these studies are going to be aimed less at trying to understand the exact details of the surface site that's involved in the catalysis, and more with trying to develop some general structure-function relationships between the catalyst phase that's present, the interaction between the reaction environment and the catalyst phase, and the selectivity. So I'm not going to be able to tell you all the pieces of the story, but what I hope to be able to get across to you is some of the understanding that I think we've evolved in doing these studies. And in fact, it'll be interesting because some of the conclusions that we come to are slightly different than some of the other conclusions that we've heard through the seminar so far. So let me start out initially with the reaction pathway model that was described to some extent yesterday. The associative chemosorption of carbon monoxide, the insertion of the C1 groups into the growing chains, and the termination of those chains in a primary products consisting of either alpha olefins or normal paraffins. And from some of the very elegant work of Professor Schultz, he's shown that this selectivity can go as high as perhaps 80% alpha olefin. What we're concerned with in maintaining alpha olefin selectivity over these catalysts, we'll see, is trying to eliminate the secondary hydrogenation reaction of the alpha olefins to the normal paraffins. So we want to try to understand what's going to be able to create the alpha olefins, and having created them, how can we get them out of an environment in which they can undergo secondary reactions. Okay, I'm going to describe some very early and simple experiments that we did. We've done these in CSTR in an autoclave environment, completely back-mixed, at reaction pressures of about 5 atmospheres with 2-to-1 hydrogen CO. And initially what we did was take some Fe3O4, which had been sintered at between 400 and 500 degrees C. That loaded our CSTR with this iron oxide and looked at its behavior. Took the catalyst out after the reaction, did X-ray diffraction on it, and after a period of about 40 hours in the reaction, we found that we were still able to maintain Fe3O4, at least as a bulk phase. And what I'm going to be describing, most of the work today, is based on bulk phase analysis. We then took that iron oxide and treated it ex situ, that is in a tube reactor at about 350 degrees in a hydrogen CO environment, generating iron carbide. We then loaded that iron carbide into our CSTR and compared the behavior of these two systems. And this is the type of thing that you find. The black bars are representative of the the bulk iron oxide system. You find that the amount of olefins that you get, say in C2, where we look at the fraction of ethylene to the total C2, the fraction of C4 olefin to the total C4, that we're making much less olefins with the bulk oxide catalyst than we were with the bulk carbide catalyst. Let me just say that both of these have not been promoted with any alkali at all. And you also see that you make somewhat heavier products with the pre-carbide catalyst is indicative of a higher C5 plus and a lower methane with the pre-carbide material. Okay. As a natural extension of this, we started to, of course, look at then what would happen if one puts alkali promoters on here, both from the traditional reasons and the idea that on the oxide surface, we're also perhaps dealing with some acid sites. In fact, we've done some titrations with 3,5-dimethylpyridine at temperatures of maybe 200 degrees centigrade, where we find that the number of acid sites per gram on the iron oxide can be quite considerable, and that these may in fact be responsible for some of the secondary reactions going on. So now we take this same type of, we do the same type of comparison, where now we put some potassium on the oxide, do the same ex situ treatment to make a whole carbide, and then look at the differences. We see that we get less of the secondary hydrogenation going on, of course, with the potassium-treated catalyst. You see that the ratio of ethylene in the C2 product is increased, same on C4. In fact, it shows up even more dramatically as we start to get to the larger olefins, the ones that would spend more time in the reaction medium, and there we see that the olefin is increased substantially, and we again do make a heavier product. Now let me just say that it became obvious early, these were very early experiments, that this was not an optimum way of trying to generate our catalyst by doing this ex situ treatment. And the reason for that goes right here. If you just look at the behavior of iron in a hydrogen CO environment, just under one atmosphere, looked at gravimetrically, you see three separate regimes during a programmed heat up. And that is, you find a slight amount of CO absorbing at lower temperatures. You then find the creation of the carbide phase, and following that, you get a rapid growth of carbon on the carbide. And in the regime that we were looking at, preparing these ex situ carbides by just heating them at temperatures around here, we were generating considerable amounts of extra carbon on these carbides. And we wanted to try to understand how this was affecting selectivity and eventually find an ulterior way of generating this catalyst. We could avoid as much as possible getting into this regime number 3. Well, one of the people in our laboratory at that time, Gary Rice, was working with laser synthesis of ceramic materials, and he became interested in trying to prepare iron carbides using a laser pyrolysis technique. Excuse me. And in contrast to the way that we were making the materials, which was starting with the oxide, heating them ex situ in hydrogen CO, and holding them there for a long period of time, he was able to take iron carbonyl, a mixture of iron carbonyl and ethylene, in the presence of a CO2 laser, couple the ethylene with the 10 micron radiation from the CO2 laser, generate a very high temperature for a very short residence time, and come out with a carbided material. That carbided material was identified from an X-ray analysis as being cementite Fe3C, very crystalline. The carbon content of that material was very close to stoichiometry. It was somewhere close to 9%. Stoichiometry is about 8%. Some XPS and Morse-Bauer spectroscopy on that material showed that there was, at most, just very trace amounts of surface oxide on it, and very small amounts, at least before it went into the reactor, of gamma iron. Okay, now one of the interesting things that we could do with this laser-generated carbide was to take some of it, which had this low amount of excess carbon on it, put it back in this mode. That is, put it in a furnace, treat it ex situ, and generate this excess matrix carbon. So now we had a controlled system to look at what this effect might be. And let me again emphasize that this carbide has no alkali on it. And this is very interesting too. Well, we find if we compare the system with the high amount of carbon, that is dark bars, against the one with the lower amount of carbon, there is a slight difference in the olefin selectivity, and that is it's better, as you might expect, having a lower amount of this carbon around so that your products can diffuse away from the active sites easier. The interesting thing is that you can make reasonably high olefin selectivities in the absence of any alkali, and these are pretty interesting systems in that we haven't found any other catalysts which give these levels of olefins in the absence of alkali. And there's a quick sidelight, let me show you what happens when you do it at alkaline. Okay, you find that in fact, there's not much increase. If you look at the C4 olefin, the C10 olefin content, it doesn't change very much with the alkali addition to these laser synthesized catalysts, which is suggesting, if you allow me to stretch a bit, perhaps that in the normally derived systems, when we start with oxides and convert them into an active phase, we may have some residual oxide or hydrogenation sites around that the alkali is able to titrate or poison, and when we're able to make a carbide by this method, we tend to mitigate or minimize that amount. Now, are there ways of starting with an oxide and getting to a similar type carbide? Which will give us similar behavior to what we've seen on the laser catalyst? Well, I'm only going to be able today to give you a suggestion of an approach to that. One of the ways of doing that would be to try to influence the degree of reducibility of the catalyst. That is, if we can get the catalyst to be more reducing, that will correlate with its ability to form the carbide at lower temperatures. If we can do that, we can probably make that carbide without any of this extra carbon around it. This also has the advantage that we may be able to do it right in the reaction conditions that we're looking at. And this just illustrates one of the systems that's been talked about. Well, this is slightly different than what we've seen before, in that here we're looking at a much higher iron-cobalt ratio than what was talked about yesterday. Here we're about 10 to 1 iron, gram atom of iron to cobalt. But you can see that even with that small addition of cobalt, there is about 20 degrees or so difference in the temperature of onset of production, and consequently ease of formation of carbide by addition of this reduction promoter. So our evidence has been, to this point, that one really wants to convert that oxide phase over to a carbide at as low a temperature as possible to get the maximum amount of olefin selectivity. Now, not only is it important to have the right bulk phase present in the reaction, but you can also have an interaction between your reaction environment and the phases that you have that can affect the catalyst and essentially affect the behavior. And let me just illustrate that point. If we take the same catalyst, and this is a modified iron oxide, which now will convert to the carbide easily, reasonably much easier than the first systems I showed you. And we look at some of this material by Mossbauer spectroscopy. This work was done by Carl Lund, who was one of the speakers here on Monday while he was at Exxon. He found that following reaction of that material in a CSTR environment, that he was able to identify K carbide as being the only phase present. If we run that same catalyst in a fixed bed under very similar conditions, and then analyze the front end of the bed versus the back end of the bed, we see a difference in what we got in the CSTR. And that is, in the front end of the bed, we have a carbide phase present with a little bit of oxide. As we go down axially towards the rear end of the bed, we find primarily an oxide phase being present. Now I'd like to show you how that correlates a little bit with some of the behavior that we see in that particular system. And here I just plotted the alpha olefin normal paraffin ratio for that same catalyst run in the two different reaction environments. And this first one with the square button with the diamond boxes over here is the alpha olefin normal paraffin ratio for the fully back mixed system, which came out looking as like a carbide, and that maintains a reasonable olefin paraffin ratio a little above 3 throughout the carbon weight distribution range up to C10. If we look at the products coming out of the fixed bed reactor, we see that in this regime, it looks like we're starting to get some secondary hydrogenation affecting decreasing our olefin paraffin ratio. And we can attribute that to perhaps the presence of that oxide phase in the latter part of the bed. And as we saw before, we're getting a lighter product with that oxide being present than we are in the back mixed reactor. The final point that I would like to make is also relates to the interaction of the reaction environment and the catalyst. And that is in trying to optimize olefin selectivity in iron-based catalysts, particularly in the systems that we're looking at, which are fully backmixed, where our catalysts are all seeing the same reactant species, and that is the product composition. The product gas is what all the catalysts are seeing. And we're working with a 2-to-1 inlet hydrogen-CO ratio with a shifting catalyst. Our consumption ratio is much less, it's around 0.5, than our feed ratio. As a result, the effective hydrogen-CO that the catalyst sees is a function of conversion. And as a result, you can really stress your catalyst by going to high conversions and high effective hydrogen-CO ratios. And you can really start to differentiate the selectivities. Now, compared the catalyst here, which has been promoted at 2 different levels of potassium, one which we'll decide is too low and one which is a lot more optimum. If we look at the 2 top lines, the purple one is showing the C4 alpha olefin to normal paraffin ratio for the system that's promoted with 0.5% of potassium. This orange one with the crosses is showing the same catalyst now promoted with 2% potassium. And what happens is, what we're really looking at is the break over here, where we've changed the space velocity and gone from fairly low conversions, 35 to 40%, to now where we've gone up to higher conversions, 65 to 70%. Because what that's doing is effectively changing our hydrogen-CO ratio from about 3 to 5. Okay, now we're asking the catalyst to make olefins with a very high hydrogen partial pressure around. And we see that whereas the catalysts behave fairly similarly at low conversions, when we shift to the high conversion conditions now, the lower loaded potassium one, the C4 starts to show a lower olefin selectivity. And this at C9 starts to show up even more significantly. Here the purple curve showing the 0.5% loaded potassium for the C9. You can see as soon as we go up to the high conditions now, the olefin paraffin ratio is decreased dramatically. So this is a very effective test and another way in which the reaction environment interplays with the catalyst bases that are present and affects our selectivity. So let me just sum up what some of the findings and empirical rules that we've generated, which have helped us towards developing selective olefin synthesis catalysts. And they would be that alpha olefins are the primary products, and we're faced with limiting the amount of secondary hydrogenation. That there's an interplay of the catalyst composition and the reaction environment, which will determine the extent of secondary reactions. And these secondary products are favored by bulk oxides being present in the system. The primary products are favored in systems where, at least bulk-wise, we have the carbide being present. We've identified catalyst reducibility as an important parameter in trying to get our catalyst to reduce at low temperatures. And the extent of matrix carbon buildup as being something that we would like to avoid in generating high olefin selectivity. We find that our systems can respond selectivity-wise to the degree of conversion. And in fact, this is one of the tests that we have to determine when we have an optimal olefin selectivity. And that fixed bed and CSTR reactors, by virtue of creating different phase manifolds in the systems, can in fact affect different product selectivities. And finally, I'd like to thank very much my co-authors and co-workers on this project, one of which is Rob, who's co-chairing here, and the other one, Enrique Iglesias, who's been tremendous help in assisting this community in this work. And thanks for your attention.
Question here. Were you using the solvent in the CSTR?
Yes, we're using octocosane primarily.
In your experiments between the carbide catalyst and the magnetite catalyst, are you operating there at comparable severity, i.e.
a similar conversion?
Hydrogen-CO conversion, that would give you similar diffusive properties and similar hydrogen-CO ratios?
Yes, we will. In fact, let me add that.
That's real important.
When we get over to the so-called active carbide phases, we do have higher activities than the original oxide systems.
And is that because of improved diffusivities? Any idea?
Well, I would guess that the inherent active site that we have in those systems is going to be more active. Okay, be it carbide or whatever the active site is on the carbide catalyst.
Either more sites or more active sites.
Yes.
Stu, can you say something about the stability of activity in your catalyst? And specifically, if you were to run your catalyst at the low hydrogen to CO ratio of about 0.7, what would you get? And one final comment is, do you see any additional stability that comes to the system because you start with cement type, because it's a stable structure?
No, we see minor differences, first one, just the last one, between cement type or hay carbides, which you normally make for the conversion of the oxide over to the carbide. Slight differences, not major ones. In terms of running at lower hydrogen CO ratios, as you're closer to your consumption ratio and feed ratio, or closer, you're working with an effectively lower hydrogen CO ratio, and that will help you in your olefins. Stability is a complicated parameter for a lot of your reaction conditions, temperature, pressure, and so on. And there's a lot of variable space that you have to work with that. But I think some of the stability issues and so on relate to the same types of phase conversions that we might have even in the activation process.
Way back in the back first. No, behind you first.
Okay, we both are from the yeah. I'm assuming that your CSTR is a slurry phase reactor.
Yes. Yes.
And I would also assume that you ran both in fixed bed and slurry phase in given condition. What would you recommend?
What would I recommend?
Yes. C2 to C4 is about 94%. You are getting something very high selectivity. There is another about 25% or so. Which one would you recommend for operation in a point of view? Slurry phase or a fixed bed?
I personally prefer the slurry for the reason that, one, you can work with much smaller particles, which helps with the transport problems. Two, all of your catalysts use the same inlet gas. Okay, so you have less of a problem. You can still perhaps make a percentage of oxide or percentage of carbide, but it's easier to control, and you don't have sections of your bed partitioning into different phases. So,
okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What's the best result you have got so far?
Well, I think it's possible to get the selectivity similar to what Dr. Schultz is indicated in the past as primary products, even at high conversions. That's about all I can say. I can just refer you to some patent literature to look further.
Well, I thought that an excellent make out it covers almost every selectivity you can. But I know
That's true. I will agree with that. You can get almost any selectivity you want if you play with enough catalysts.
Okay, that's perspective.
Even if you start with a manufactured catalyst, after some hours on screen, change to a carbide, then how would the catalyst be different from a...
Well, I think that's the whole point, is that you want to be able to enhance that conversion over to the carbide. And what we really look for are ways of having that happen, doing that transformation.
Now, will the selectivity measured at sufficiently long time after time so that you not get spurious effects? Because if you make the comparison in the beginning, when before the oxide had a chance to convert to the carbide, of course it will create difference.
Right. But like I was saying, we're trying to get it to convert quickly. For example, that Mossbauer spectra, which showed the complete carbide phase, was done on a system which had been in the reactor for somewhere between 50 and 100 hours, not very long. And we see the conversion, if the systems are made properly, occurring very rapidly. If you start with just bulk oxide, you're sort of right on the edge of where you might start converting over. And so a lot of the the ideas developed here have been trying to get that conversion to go over at less severe conditions so it'll occur more rapidly. So I guess my answer to you is that if you get it over to the carbide, you're going to start seeing the selectivities that we're talking about here. There are some other subtleties involved too, which come into play, I'm sure as you're aware.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Take that from you. We're on to the last talk of the session.